he's back by popular demand. He did a presentation. Elton did a presentation on choosing the Tao for this Aquarian series back last spring. And we had people in the San Diego Lodge walking around saying Taoist kind of things for like 2 weeks. So it was really cool. And so this week, we will be hearing about Jalāl Rūmī. And Elton will teach us how to pronounce it correctly. And every week we explore something from a different spiritual tradition. And it could be a formal religion, or it could be a spiritual mystic that was more or less closely tied in with a spiritual religion, or it could be just a great poet. It could be Shakespeare, or it could be a philosopher. And so what this does to me is it helps us to look at theosophy and theosophical ideas from multiple perspectives, which I think is what the second object of the theosophical movement is about, actually. And that helps us transcend and overcome any kind of concretized theories or ideas that we may have had about theosophy. It helps us overcome any kind of tribalism. It helps us see things from always an alternative perspective. So, and then of course, everyone loves Rūmī. So next week, we will be hearing a presentation from Monica Page. And I don't have it written down the exact title of it, but it's Ahimsa Satyagraha and the Remarkable Life and Influence of Mahatma Gandhi. That is the title. Yes, I got it right. Ahimsa Satyagraha, the Remarkable Life and Influence of Mahatma Gandhi. And she's going to go into King Mandela, the Norwegian ecologist Arne Næss, and so forth. So that will be incredible. Then the week after that, we have the rediscovery of America. And Elton and I were just talking earlier about it's a wonder how long America might even last. But maybe there's some dissolution that's happening so that we can rediscover what the true future for America and humanity is at this phase. And then we have evolution of sex, of course. And of course, we have a psychiatrist to help us with that one, Dr. Jean Jennings. And I forgot to mention that the discovery of America will be Ravi Tupfer. So he's looking forward to that. Oh, and then after that, we have unconditionality, and that'll be Alex Bianchi. So we have a lot to look forward to, and I will just introduce Elton right now. He's been a friend of mine for 30-something years, and I've always been deeply impressed and inspired and grateful for his contributions to the movement. Whenever I read anything that he's written, I think of like the mighty pen of Elton. He has been a professor at numerous community colleges and universities, actually throughout this country, before and after teaching and working at Santa Barbara. And he currently resides in Ithaca, New York. And we have asked him to tell us about Rūmī. So here you go, Elton.
There's something very interesting about the period of Rūmī. He lived from 1207 to 1273 AD. But there's something interesting about that period in the Middle East and Europe. There was kind of, among a lot of figures, a kind of mystical explosion that occurred. And I'm thinking specifically of just a couple people, Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi, who lived from 1165 to 1240, who plays the role in philosophical Islam that Plato plays in Western philosophy. Since him, you can't do anything philosophical, whether you like him or not, without addressing him and what he said. Then there's Rūmī. And in Europe itself, you think of Meister Eckhart, who talked about God above God, who lived from 1260 to 1328. And all of that's occurring during what we tend to call the Holy Land Crusades between 1095 and 1291. There were lots of crusades. A lot of them occurred in Europe against Europeans against other Europeans. There were about 65 so-called crusades, but the Holy Land Crusades fall in that period. Now, except for from a quotation, the second one I'll use, which comes from that book, The Jewel and the Lotus. Those of you who have that, it's reading 271 on page 244. Except for that one, all of the quotes I'm going to use are from Coleman Barks's translation called The Soul of Rūmī, which was published in 2001. And I should say, to begin with, if you're interested, I'm just talking from notes, but if you're interested in the notes, I put in the chat my email. Send me an email and I'll be happy to send you the notes. Rūmī was born in 1207, either in Afghanistan or southern Tajikistan. It's not quite clear, but near Balkh in Afghanistan. His father, Baha'uddin Walad, was a Sufi who had his own spiritual teacher. But when Rūmī was still pretty young, perhaps an early teenager, his father moved the whole family west because the Mongols were invading that area between 1215 and 1220 and doing an awful lot of damage. And so he just left. They settled for a while in Baghdad, and during that time they made a pilgrimage to Mecca, which, as you know, every Muslim, if they can, is expected to do so once at least in their life. But he finally came to reside in Konya in Turkey, where his father established a Sufi school there. When Rūmī was 25, he took over the school because his father had died. And for, quite a while, he taught his father's form of Sufism, almost for 10 years. And in 1241, he became a known public presence because he started giving sermons in mosques. He even issued fatwas because he'd become a jurist, legal scholar. A fatwa is a non-binding legal opinion on some religious law. But if you remember, there's not a big distinction between religious and secular law in Islam traditionally. So it often has political implications to it. He visited Damascus for a while, but he primarily served as the spiritual teacher of his school. He came to be known as Rūmī, which was not his name originally, because his public spiritual activities occurred in Konya, which is in west central Turkey. And at that time in Arabic, that area of Turkey was known as Rūm. And that's because for hundreds and hundreds of years, it had been part of the Byzantine Empire, and before that, the Roman Empire. And the Byzantine Empire was often called the New Rome. So that area was just known as Rūm. And so, of course, Rūmī, means from Rome, or of Rome. So that's how he got the name. On November 15th, 1244, so he'd been in his upper 30s, he met a figure named Shamse Tabrizi, and his life completely changed. Shams only said once that a voice sent him to Rūmī. The two immediately clicked. I mean, just unbelievably so. They immediately connected spiritually and at some level quite beyond ordinary understanding. We don't know a lot about what Rūmī and Shams ever talked about, except that it was always incredibly spiritual. Rūmī became an ascetic. He spoke only of spiritual things after that. Forget the jurisprudence. He did give sermons in a kind of standard way, but they are like Meister Eckhart's sermons. They're full of a lot to think about there. And I'm sorry, that's my daughter's dachshund in the background, welcoming her home. His students, in fact, became very jealous because Rūmī was spending so much time with Shams and seemingly ignoring his other spiritual duties. The closeness, of course, is what gave rise to the jealousy, because they would often retreat together, Rūmī and Shams, for distinctive periods of time. Finally, feeling their kind of anger and jealousy, Shams left and went to Damascus, but he wasn't there very long before Rūmī called him back. And then stories on what happened, we don't know much about, but it happened on December 5th, 1248. One account says that Shams simply left and was gone and was never seen again. Another account, which may or may not be just a rumor, was that he was called out of Rūmī's tent and suddenly beheaded, perhaps by one of Rūmī's sons. We don't know. These stories come later. What we do know is that for the remainder of his life, Rūmī lamented the loss of Shams and cast his spiritual teachings and aspirations in terms of Shams, the ultimate friend. And his poems often end with an invocation of Shams. He spent a long time searching for Shams. He went to Damascus, he went around, but he never found out anything. Eventually, he came to the realization, and this is his words, "Why should I seek? I am the same as he. His essence speaks through me. I have been looking for myself." So this raises an obvious question. Who is Shams? He remains a mystery. No one knows really where he came from. No one knows for sure where he went. And so there's been a lot of speculation on both Shams and the relationship between Shams and Rūmī. Some of it has not been very nice, and it's all speculative. We just don't know. But what we do know is that Rūmī was deeply steeped in Islamic study, always with a mystical side, and Shams burst that dimension wide open, and Rūmī put everything else aside. It was the utter transformation of a natural mystic. Rūmī might remind you a bit, if you read around, of maybe somebody like Ramana Maharshi. He just had this natural mysticism. Now, a theosophist would say, well, yes, much preparation in previous lives, but in this life, it was just there, right? Almost from birth. And it was yet still a transformation. And he was clearly prepared for a very radical development, which is exactly what happened when Shams showed up. So since everybody's had an opinion about this, I'm going to give you my opinion. It's only my opinion. It's based on nothing but my thinking and appreciating Rūmī. And that is that Shams was actually an initiate, a high adept, who saw that Rūmī was prepared. And what I'm thinking there is that analogy given by H.P. Blavatsky, that humanity could be seen as this kind of dark shadow spread out in space. And high adepts just keep an eye on that shadow, because here and there, a light shows up, and you can think of like a candle in the darkness. You can see it from far away. And they are drawn to that light because that light is the spiritual potential of someone who could really make use of real teaching and so on. So that's my speculation. It fits what we've been taught about high beings and how they operate, but it's only my opinion, and we'll just have to leave it at that. Rumi's understanding of his encounter with Shams is summed up in a poem. And this is the poem, part of it. Shams is the master who turns the earth fragrant. When plants feel him near, they open out. I would not have a soul if after tasting Shams, I could go back to being who I was. In mystical Islam, taste is kind of used like rasa is used in Hindu thought. We would say, maybe sight or fragrance, but they often use taste. As one can see, Rūmī used the sensual imagery common in classical Persian poetry to intimate deeper things. A beautiful example of this is the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. It has in it a book of verse, a jug of wine, and thou. Earth is paradise now. But the book of verse is the Quran. A jug of wine is wisdom, and thou is God. And so that often sensual imagery you find in Persian, classical Persian poetry and in Arabic poetry plays out through all the Sufi mystics, and they have to be read that way. Rūmī, of course, founded that meditative group that we call the whirling dervishes in Turkey. The Sufi dancers who rotate around a central pole, Qutb, the pole, representing the spiritual sun. The dancers are the planets orbiting the sun. This is obviously a metaphor for human beings circumambulating their inner spiritual center. It's a form of meditation, moving meditation, though the dervishes that now perform today have taken on a kind of tourist aspect, and then I suspect the purpose is often diminished because of that. Once awakened, Rūmī became a great spiritual teacher who both gave depth to his tradition, Islam and the Quran, and transcended it. Just as those teachers mentioned at the beginning, Ibn Arabi, right, Muslim, following all the Muslim practices, said all religions are one. Meister Eckhart, the same kind of thing, which reminds us as the second object, of course, of the Theosophical Society. It's like these figures have recognized at some deep and often not really easily expressed level exactly what the second object aims to try to show. That at root, all religions and philosophy, insofar as they have truth in them, are rooted in the same ultimate source, Theosophia. So he honored the forms of Islam and the duties it imposes, like the affirmation of the unity of deity, Allah, praying, journeying, if possible, to Mecca, which he'd done, the giving of alms, and so on. But his vision was universal. For the remainder of his life, he spontaneously composed poems reminiscent of the Vedic seers that formed one long text known as the Masnavi, as people wrote them down. Masnavi means couplets because they come in two-line couplets, consisting of 6 books totaling 25,000 verses, 50,000 lines. Although he composed mostly in Farsi, that is classical Persian, he also occasionally used Arabic, Turkish, and Greek. And he placed the human being right at the heart of all existence. This is the poem that comes from the Jewel. I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as animal, and I was a man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from an angel I must pass on. All except God must perish. When I have sacrificed my angel soul, I shall become what no mind ever conceived. If one thinks in the philosophical terms of the constitution of man, this is very, very meaningful. We recall the Sufi saying in the Aquarian Almanac for Sunday, for the 26th, in the heart of man, the whole universe is reflected. Very much a view Rūmī would endorse. Of course, he did not think of such reincarnation as the reincarnation of Rūmī, the personality, but of Rūmī, the spiritual soul. Because he said, you're from a country beyond the universe, yet your best guess is you're made of earth and ashes. You engrave this physical image everywhere as a sign that you've forgotten where you're from. I'm going to read that one again. That is just so great. You're from a country beyond the universe, yet your best guess is you're made of earth and ashes. You engrave this physical image everywhere as a sign that you've forgotten where you're from. A few weeks ago, I think a few of you were studying the Gospel according to Thomas, the Institute of World Culture, which is perhaps a Gnostic work, where in Logian or saying 37, the disciples asked Jesus when they will see him as he really is. His disciples said, when will you become revealed to us, and when shall we see you? Jesus said, when you disrobe without being ashamed, and take up your garments and place them under your feet like little children and tread on them, then you will see the Son of the Living One, and you will not be afraid. Time to put away that earth and those ashes. In one poem, Rūmī puts it this way: to the newborn, the father babbles language. Father babbles language noise, while the child with his pure intellect scans the universe. The nobility of a master is not diminished by some misplaced diacritical marking. Try to go inside the infant's vast wordlessness, which is the same as the silence of a teacher. So you'll notice that Samuel Miller Hageman in the Almanac for Friday, October 1st, says, every sound shall end in silence, but the silence never dies. In both Rūmī's and the Gospel of Thomas's cases are transitory vestures, and the language we use in them to distract from our view of what we really are, they must be set aside if we're to get closer to the truth. And then Rūmī puts it very dramatically in a way we might expect a Buddhist or Hindu philosopher to put it. He says, essence is emptiness. Everything else is accidental. Accidental in the sign of contingent, relative. Essence is emptiness. Everything else is accidental. Emptiness brings peace to your loving. Everything else, dis-ease. In this world of trickery, emptiness is what your soul wants. Or to use kind of a different metaphor, every forest branch moves differently in the breeze, but as they sway, they connect at the roots. Just this afternoon, I was reading a book about fungi and how they connect up. The largest known connection is 3 square miles in a forest in Oregon, and how they send electrical impulses throughout that whole mat they create. And the author is raising the question, is there some kind of intelligence here? I think most of us would say, yep. They connect, but as they sway, they connect at the roots. What an insight for somebody who wasn't a forester. Since humanity, and indeed all existence, is one, brotherhood is a fact in nature. And the binding force of that brotherhood is love. And so Rūmī says, love is the way messengers from the mystery tell us things. Love is a mother. We are her children. She shines inside us, visible, invisible, as we trust or lose trust, or feel it start to grow again. And then he says, this is how I would die, into the love I have for you, as pieces of cloud dissolve in sunlight. Khalil Gibran says in the Aquarian Almanac for Tuesday, September 28th, it is when you give of yourself that you truly give. And Percy Shelley says on Monday the 27th, the great secret of morals is love, or a going out of our own natures and an identification of ourselves with the beautiful which exists in thought, action, or person, not our own. The reason why I'm making those references is very often, or always, the theme for the week, like Rūmī, will be reflected in the quotations throughout the week by various people in various traditions. So he was clearly very universal in his vision. For him, all religions point to but cannot capture truth, or reality, or God. He said, what is praised is one. He's thinking only God is worthy of praise, and God is one. What is praised is one. So the praise is one also. Many jugs being poured into a huge basin. All religions, all this singing one song. The differences are just illusion and vanity. Sunlight looks slightly different on this wall than it does on that wall, and a lot different on this other one. But it is still one light. We have borrowed these clothes, these time and space personalities from a light. And when we praise, we pour them back in. And this light is God, which to which Rūmī often refers, but he's not referring to any personal being in a traditional Christian sense. He says, God has said, the images that come with human language do not correspond to me, but those who love words must use them to come near. Just remember, it's like saying to the king, he's not a weaver. Is that praise? Whatever such a statement is, words are on that level of God knowing. How you speak is what you know. One might think of Krishna's remarks in the Bhagavad Gita in this regard. Even what in Western thought was called the via negativa, the negative way, the attempt to characterize God by negativity. God is not this, God is not that, rather like the Hindu neti neti, not this, not that. Even that attempt to describe the divine by denying characterizations of it is insufficient, for essence is emptiness. When asked a question about a poem in the Masnavi that had been written down, Rūmī pointed to the relativity of all spoken words and the deeper connection between people. He said, and this is one of his prose passages, consider this, the word thought must be expanded to mean essence, or it does not apply to what I'm saying here. Everything that gets exchanged between people, whether it's spoken or not, is a form of such thought. Human beings are discourse. The rest is blood and bone and nerves. Call it speech, the flowing between us. Compare it to the sun, which is always warming us even when we can't see it. The speech sun is invisible, except when it takes form in language. This speech I'm describing is continuous, like the sun's light and heat. Usually we require a medium to enjoy it. But there are ways of understanding without forms. An ocean of subtlety, full of miraculous beings and new colors. This speech moves through you, whether you say anything or not. Rūmī suggests that we live in three spiritual states. In the lowest, we see only the things of the world of sensation, stones, people, money, so on. In the higher state, we worship God. But in the highest state, we become silent, for reality is beyond all thought, that is not essence itself. And then he added in his prose, we know that God is beyond being present or absent. These opposites that generate each other are not qualities of God. There are no likenesses. When you reach this point, stop. At the edge of the ocean, footprints disappear. The speech to which he refers, of course, is the innermost ideation possible. This flowing exchange, he says of such inner speech, gives flavor to every event. Words are coins, the vein of ore, and the mine shaft, what they speak of. Now consider the sun. It's neither oriental nor occidental. Only the soul knows what love is. This moment in time and space is an eggshell with an embryo crumpled inside, soaked in belief yolk. Under the wing of grace, until it breaks free of mind to become the song of an actual bird and God. Rūmī was well aware, of course, of the distractions and the pitfalls and the illusions and delusions that distract us from the path we somewhere inside of us know we should be on. He asks, are you so full of light that you can recklessly court unconsciousness? Look for shade on a bright day, they say, not on a cloudy night when everything is already obscure. Habits that bind the psyche throw dust in the eyes of our guides. Toying with fermented drink, for instance. No need to honor a petty thief. Keep his hands tied, or he will tie yours. The real wine is your compassion. The taste of that keeps the caravan pointed home. Be reasonable. Don't give morning energy to what clearly hurts you. So we can lessen or increase those distractions through the associations we make. While we're advised to be open and generous to all, we are encouraged to seek true friendship, forming a kind of brotherhood and sisterhood with those who aspire to realize what they ultimately are, one together and one in the one that Rūmī calls Allah, the God. Allah, remember, is all Ilah, comes from all Ilah, the God. Using a culinary metaphor, Rūmī expresses the problem broadly. I love this one. The soul fell into the soup of nature and started mixing with all manners of delicious and not so tasty ingredients. Our actions take on a tinge of those we're near. God keep us from bitter company. As we're encouraged to look beyond the chaotic world of everyday life, Euripides reminds us in the Aquarian Almanac for September 29th that we should slight not what is near through aiming at what's far. Everything in nature is alive with the transcendent if we would only notice it. For as Rūmī says, there is a shimmering excitement in being sentient and shaped. The caravan master sees his camels lost in it, nose to tail, as he himself is, his friend, and the stranger coming toward them. A gardener watches the sky break into song, cloud wobbly with what it is, bud, thorn, the same, wind, water, wondering this essential state, fire, brown, gone. That's how it is with the outside. Form is ecstatic. Now imagine the inner soul, intelligence, the secret worlds. And don't think the garden loses its ecstasy in winter. It's quiet, but the roots are down there riotous. If someone bumps you in the street, don't be angry. Everyone careens about in this surprise. Respond in kind. Let the knots untie. Turbans be given away. Someone drunk on this could drink a donkey load a night. Believer, unbeliever, cynic, lover, all combine in the spirit form we are. But no one is yet awake like Shams. Rumi's message is always the same. Reality, including human reality, is beyond the physical body, physical senses, and physical world those senses observe. All thinking, all religion and faith is useless unless it points beyond these illusory limitations and guides us beyond to a unity that reflects the unity of God. Though life is distracting and suffering, we need to, and here's a poem. As regards feeling pain, like a hand cut in battle, consider the body a robe you wear. Search out who's inside. Union with God is sweeter than body comforts. We have hands and feet different from these. Sometimes in dream, we see them. This is not illusion. It's seeing truly. You do have a spirit body. Don't dread leaving the physical one. Sometimes someone feels truth so strongly that he or she can live in mountain solitude, totally refreshed. The worried, heroic doings of men and women seem weary and futile to dervishes enjoying the light breeze of spirit. And as Rūmī points out again and again, we as embodied beings are transient and we will die. That is, we will shed these clothes for others in the future. We can enter this transition as renunciants, renouncing the distractions of the turb of the world and of our transient nature, looking toward the light that is beyond the transient. So he says, some clouds do not obscure the moon, and there are mornings when drops of rain descend from an open sky. A saint is a cloud that's there, but with its cloud nature erased. Something in us wants no intermediary, no nurse, just to be be with wide blue, the sky, merged with the mother's breast, sublime emptiness. There's a way of leaving the world that nourishes the world. Don't do anything for applause. What you are is a soul that is both food and hunger, longing for what the longing is for. Remember that, and then try to experience renunciation. So Rūmī was a mystic whose poems and chants profoundly affected the world, and does so down to today. Rūmī is still widely read, especially in Persian. We are fortunate to hear him, even though in a language he could not know, for his message is universal and therefore timeless. We might just conclude by noticing that Robert Browning in the Aquarian Almanac for Saturday, October 2nd says, truth is within ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Elton, so much. Will you be so kind as to entertain some questions and conversation?
Sure.
You can either put your hand up or, with the computer, you know, that high five that the hand thing does, or just speak up. Is everybody muted, Truth? And do you need to do something about that? Or
Yes, with the raised hand feature, people use that and then we unmute them. But what I've done is I've just gone ahead and allowed people to unmute themselves in the settings. So
okay.
you should be able to unmute yourself. Please mute yourself after speaking. Go ahead, Arnie.
Oh, yes. This is morning here, 5 a.m. in Mumbai. I am the Blavatsky Lodge here in Mumbai, and I should say it is sheer synchronicity. This Facebook page popped up early in the morning when I looked into my Android, because I've started to write an article on Sufism, A Journey to the Mystic Rose, just 2 days ago. Yeah, just 2 days ago. And I've been reading a little bit, but actually my interest in Sufism kicked off because my guru from whom I got initiated into Kriya Yoga, he's also from California, Nevada. Swami Kriyananda, if you've heard of, he's the last disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. And I got initiated directly from him in India when he visited us before he died. And
You have a
he
question?
is, sorry?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just give you the background so that you understand. He talks of this Rūmī, the Rubaiyat Umar Khayyam. So that's where my interest in Sufism kicked off. Now, Brother Elton has given a very good reference about Ramana Maharishi and the Vedanta, because this is all connected with the unity of silence. So there is unity, there is silence. So I think that's where the core of similarity is. I would also like to know, is Rūmī can also be compared with the Bhakti movement in India, if Elton is aware.
I think it would kind of depend on which Bhakti movement, but certainly, you know, that ecstatic dance is a kind of meditation. So it's not just like celebration. So I think it would depend on which bhaktis you're talking about, but I could easily see a connection there. Given where he came from and where those Sufis that his father learned from and so on were in Afghanistan, there were obviously connections across, you know, there would be inspiration back and forth, right down into India, I'm sure. But in terms of details in a scholarly way, I don't have those, of course.
Okay.
Thank you, Elton. Lillian calling from Deerfield Beach, Florida. I'm part of the alternate theosophical group, the actual Theosophical Society. And I thank you so much for your, what I could only describe as a very nourishing presentation on Rūmī, really bringing so many different references in. Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure.
Well, the nourishment comes from the poems, and there was a real temptation just to pick the book up and read all the poems, but we'd be here for a couple of days. But yes.
May I ask a question? First of all, am I muted? No, I'm not muted.
No.
Just in reference to what the first questioner asked, with reference to silence, and I think you referred that to essence and that which is beyond words. And I'm thinking there's that kind of legendary meeting with, I believe it was Emerson and was it Carlyle? Where, is that who it was? It was Emerson and somebody from about they just met in silence, you know, and they smoked their pipes and so forth, but not a whole lot was said, right? And then also in a more of a kind of a mystical way, Chopin keeps bringing this up, the hymn to Dakshinamurti, the teaching was silence. Remember that? The disciples were elders, the teacher was a youth, I believe, and the teaching was silence. Does the silence have, oh, and earlier we had a almanac presentation on reincarnation and silence. And that got me to thinking about, does the silence not only refer to that which is ultimately transcendent, but does it refer to that which is the part of the immortal continuity within a human being?
That is a very good question. But the immortal continuity in a human being ultimately is not different from that the silence is referring to. It's not different from what Rūmī, or I should say what Coleman Barks translates as essence, which we would have a different word for. What I think Rūmī is trying to say there is that what is real about us and what is ultimately real are not different. There's, some of you will know that there was this mystic before Rūmī called Al-Halaj. And in one of his mystic trances, he said, I am Al-Haq. Al-Haq is the, sorry for my bad pronunciation, is the Arabic word for real or true. It's one of the divine names of Allah in the Quran. And so what he said was, I am the real, or I am the truth. He was crucified for that. But in one poem, Rūmī says, they didn't get it. They should have understood, I am the truth. And so Rūmī says, I am the truth. But of course, what he's saying there is that which is the real, the true, permeates everything. You know, the trees are connected at their roots. It's in us. So that when we speak of the transcendent, we're not meaning above, out there somewhere beyond the stars, though it's there too. But we mean it's what? It transcends the ordinary perceptions we have. It transcends the imagination we can use. It transcends the language, the concepts, and so on. But it's right here. You know, so you get that kind of famous line, you know, you start on the spiritual path, and if successful, you end up where you started. You know, or the famous Zen one, you know, before enlightenment, mountains were mountains and trees were trees. After enlightenment, mountains are mountains and trees are trees, you know. And as for silence, that famous line in one of the Mahayana scriptures, which is allegedly the foundation of Zen, where the Buddha is asked a question about ultimate reality and he holds up a flower and smiles. And the disciple becomes enlightened. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think you'd have to say there's silence in silence. I can fall silent. That doesn't mean I'm enlightened. There is a, so to speak, deeper silence that I have to find within.
Maurice has had his hand up for a long time.
So I just
Thank you, Elton, for a wonderful, deeply thoughtful talk. And I just like it. Could you say something more about Rumi and love and the ascent in consciousness? Because it seems that so much of Rumi is about love. But what, and there's Eros, maybe much like Plato in some ways, but maybe you could say a bit more about love and the role of the ascent, separateness to unity or something.
Right. In part, the Sufis actually did, I can't say they made use of Plato, but they certainly made use of ideas that you find in Plato, thoughts you find there, because that whole Greek tradition before the time of Rumi went right into the Middle East. In fact, right, it was those Greek works, often confused sometimes, got translated into Arabic, and Western Europe's first awareness of them, just around this time, was through Spain, when the Muslims still had much of Spain, and you got the Reconquista as the non-Muslim Christian population began to take over Spain again, got translated into Latin. So a great deal of what, for a long time, of what we knew about ancient Greek thought and Plato came from the Arabs. They had a famous work called The Philosophy of Aristotle, which is really Plato. They got the names confused. That had a huge influence in Western thought before about the collapse of Byzantium, when it, just before the Renaissance, just after the Renaissance, you got Greek works coming straight over as Byzantine scholars fled Byzantium and came west into places like Italy. But that first reintroduction, the only thing in Plato that survived in the West was the Timaeus, until you begin to get these things. So the Sufis were well aware, as they were of the Quran and many other things, being very highly educated on the whole group of Plato's thought. Now, as to love, and of course, Plato's whole, love, you start by looking at Eros. First is attracted to objects, and then you get attracted to, so to speak, the spirit of those objects, and then you get attracted to, right, like the love of humanity rather than individuals, then the love of life in general, and up until you realize that Eros is the creative principle of the universe. And Rumi thinks of it very much that way when he's talking about love. What he doesn't do is he doesn't give sermons on love. He doesn't give poems that, so to speak, are poems on love. He uses it in all these different contexts, and you heard it several times in these poems, right? And you begin to realize it's the theme that ties everyone and everything together. And beyond that, I can't say a great deal about it, only because he never does a philosophy of love or even a disquisition on love itself. Rather, what he says is love. That's our job. And to do that, we have to move beyond ourselves. He often talks about, distractions and all of that, and we identify with earth and ashes and so on. He doesn't talk a lot about selfishness either, because we've moved beyond that. I mean, he's talking about just being beyond that. If everything is connected with everything else, selfishness ceases to have a meaning. If we realize everything is connected with everything else, that article I mentioned just as we were beginning, I just read about various kinds of fungus and how they're interconnected. One of the questions being raised there is, can we talk about fungi, or is there just the fungus, just the one? When we talk about all these interconnections that all these mats have, are we talking about just one life or lots of individual lives? So it's completely blurred here. I think in anyone really trying to seek to understand themselves at a deep level, that distinction gets blurred too. In fact, in this article, it roams off slightly into bacteria and pointing out how as much as 40% of the human body is bacteria in it, doing things that help it, mostly, sometimes not. He says, but you have to also remember, we have this cloud of bacteria around us all the time. Where do you end and the next person begins? I mean, the more you begin to explore it, the categories we just casually use in everyday language and that get sometimes frozen in philosophy just increasingly cease to make sense. They just, you start looking at things, you can't really make sense of it. I think I saw Marlon's hand.
You have to unmute yourself.
Alton, like everyone else, I want to thank you so much. It's so wonderful to see you again and to listen to you. And my question is, Fahime and I, there's a local political discussion group, and one of the topics was oil in the Middle East. It's a political question. And I thought it'd be very interesting, since Fahime is from Iran, to read a few Rūmī poems and let them get a taste for that, and how maybe we can begin to understand the differences and the similarities of our cultures so we can bridge the two, as you've been saying about fungi. And so I read some poems, and one of the persons said, oh, well, that's great, that's poetry. Now, can we get to the topic? And I'm wondering, Alton, how would you answer that?
Would partly depend on what the set topic was supposed to be. I don't think, how shall I put it? Theosophical pushiness is not, I think, very helpful. Yeah. The teacher will appear when the disciple is ready. And one can take that at many different levels. Now, that doesn't mean one just keeps quiet. But when somebody says, can we return to the topic? Fine, we return to the topic. But there were other people who heard the poem or poems. What effect that had? Yeah. So you don't know what effect that had. There may have been somebody out there who 2 weeks from now will be thinking about something you read, and you'll never hear about it. We have to be a little careful of, immediate surface impressions and reactions. Even somebody who says, can we get to the topic, may tomorrow not help but be thinking about something you read from Rūmī. So I think we just take those things, very impersonally and move on. Instead of trying to force the issue like, you should be listening to Rūmī, right? It's more important. Just let that go. Karma will take care of itself. Either Maurice has more questions or he didn't put his hand down.
No, Robert and Kirk also had a question.
Yeah.
I apologize if there was someone else that I didn't notice.
Yes, I had a question because you, in one of the poems, you talked about it's like human beings are in some kind of constant dialogue.
Mhm.
And I wondered how that worked, because on one level, like you talked about, we're always talking about concepts, which is some kind of separation between us and reality. But also it's our link. So what kind of conversation are we continuously involved in with one another?
A few nights ago, and I don't remember the content because I'm very bad at this, but a few nights ago, you showed up in a dream I had. Robert and I have known each other for many, many years, which was not surprising. It doesn't happen often with people I know, but it does happen. There's some kind of connection there. My thoughts, if we can't keep the bacteria in our body, but it forms a cloud around us all the time, imagine what our thoughts are doing. Our thoughts are out there. They're not just in our heads. So when he said, it was a prose piece where he said it, I'll get the words just right. Human beings are discourse. We are constant speech because our minds are constantly working. Now, all of nature could be seen as discourse too, at every level. But at the beginning, I pointed out that he centers it on the human being because we're kind of in the middle, right? I died as a mineral and became a plant. And that whole passage again, we're right there. There's something very central about that. Human beings are discourse. So your thoughts, your feelings, and everything are constantly out there in the ocean of humanity, affecting all of us, and we're all affecting you, which is one of the reasons why we're constantly taught, we should be thinking both good and high and positive thoughts. One of the things that's really hard, I found, with Marlon's situation, people say, let's get back to business. I found very difficult to maintain is people get, wrapped up in this election, that congressional action or lack of it, that this, that, and the other, all CNN all day long. And to say, let's take a longer view, like the Aquarian Age, another 2,000 years, or like the whole of Kali Yuga, or like, for a lot of people that does not speak. Well, that's fine. That's where they're at. We're all wending our way, and we all do what we do through self-devised efforts, whether we even know that or not. But the idea is out there. Oh, there may be a longer view. And if we're thinking about that, that can affect people. I don't know, I used to do it, I don't do so much anymore, but I used to do a lot of writing for various things. And, concentrating on something, suddenly an idea appears. Oh, now where did that come from? Who knows where it came from? But it might have been you, or the next door neighbor, or someone down the street, or someone invisible, or what? We constantly influence one another, unbeknownst to ourselves and usually to one another that way. And if you think that there are wise beings who do have the capacity for Kriya Shakti, genuine creative ideation. By our thinking the larger thoughts, we invite the influence of larger thoughts that come from them. That doesn't mean, like Euripides said, that doesn't mean you ignore what's right in front of your nose. There are duties there, there are obligations, there are things that have to be done. Hence that famous book on Zen, After Enlightenment, the Laundry. Okay, but you can do the laundry and still have high thoughts.
Kirk.
And there was somebody else, and I forget now.
I think it was Kirk Rudine.
Oh, hi, Kurt.
Hello, Elton. Thank you so much. There's so many passages there where one just felt the mind opening up to another level of awareness, and he takes the most common experience, like the one you said you loved so much about soup, how we're all in a bowl of soup, right? And also the one about, at the edge of the shore, footprints disappear. And so on. It's just like one after the other, you're just like carried from the immediate into something transcendent, so the spiritual becomes a living. But so thank you so much. But the question is not fully formulated, but I was just thinking, I've been reading Syed Hassan Nasser's work from the 90s. It's called Religion and the Order of Nature. And he says that, this very deep esoteric side of Islam that, goes back to the beginnings, really. And he traces it, from the time of Muhammad, that it was there in the teaching. And it's been there present, throughout its history. But there's also this other dimension, of course, of Islam that's locked into kind of seems like a dogmatic orthodoxy and militant as well, and where jihad, becomes instead of the conquering of oneself, it becomes the conquering of the other, the devil that's out there, and so on. So I'm just wondering, and then the other thing is that Islam is said to be the fastest growing religion right now worldwide. And so I wonder if you could help us make sense of that, understand, what kind of influence is the deeper esoteric side of Islam, part of that wave of interest in this tradition.
Part of that is a historic question, current history, which I wouldn't pretend to be up on. Let me take a related example. Unfortunately, I think it is comparable. You have the teachings of Jesus. We're familiar enough with those teachings to kind of know what they are, like the Sermon on the Mount, and various examples he gave with his life. Then you turn on the radio and you hear an evangelist say that Jesus wants you to be rich. He wants you to be comfortable. He wants you to be happy. I thought Jesus said, I bring not peace, but a sword. And that has some meaning too. That is, you listen to the evangelist and it is 100% opposite what Jesus said. 100%. Read your Bible if you don't think so. At least what we attribute to Jesus. What this tells us is what HPB in a number of her articles and in editorials constantly pointed out about people reacting to theosophy. Ideas, if they are powerful enough to attract, let us say, force your attention, can be completely turned on their head if you are sufficiently selfish, sufficiently set in your thinking, sufficiently prejudiced in HPB sense of the word, which means you have these predispositions to think a certain way and you never challenge them. That's just going to happen. In fact, HPB at one point says, when that happens, you know these teachings are having an effect because they provoke a reaction. Same thing in Sufism. Yes, you do get very orthodox allegedly, very rigid versions, just like you get very rigid versions of readings of the Quran. All right. My experience has been when teaching world religions to students, when we got to Christianity, I would sometimes ask, how many of you would be willing to call yourself a Christian? A class of 35, maybe 28, 29 would typically. Is that how many of you read the New Testament? 3. How many of you read the whole Bible? I got once in a series of classes, one who said yes. That tells you a lot. Who are you listening to? So you say, I'm Muslim. What do you know about the Quran? Have you actually read it? Well, we know that in some of those people who are now very much engaged in violence in terms of jihad means I'm fighting you, whatever you is, we know they're illiterate. So their only access to the scriptural teachings of Islam is what is read to them. Well, if you've ever listened to an evangelist on TV or on the radio for a while, you'll discover that's usually a very selective reading. So I see that as a universal problem that you find everywhere. You find it in Buddhism, you find it in Hinduism. HPB talks a lot about that. You find it in Islam, and right now it just happens to be that's a very painful version of it. But you find it in Christianity, which to me is just as painful a version. Take the sacred, select bits of it, take it out of context, and you can corrupt consciousness. It's as simple as that. What's his name who wrote this truth? C.S. Lewis. The screw tape letters, the letters of a senior devil to his nephew, a junior devil, just learning the ropes of devilry. Wonderful book to read, because he writes how you play on human weaknesses. And you don't invent an alternative scripture. You select and splice what a person already knows or thinks they know. And you can corrupt them very well that way. And to me, that all over the world, this is what is happening. And it's partly happening because religions are losing their hold because they became a bit too fossilized. And one of the things that Theosophy tries to do, getting back to the root, is not to make everybody give up their faith. You know, HPB says, stay whatever tradition you want. You're welcome. Even atheism, even materialism. But to get back to that root would revitalize whatever it is your particular thinking is. Gandhi said that. Gandhi is next week, but he said that. You know, so a Christian minister visiting him said, you know, should I convert to Hinduism? He says, no, you know, go deep into your Christianity and you'll end up where I am. Or that more flippant remark he once made when somebody asked him what he thought of Christianity and said, well, it should be tried sometime. Good way of putting it. Good way of putting it. And we could say that to theosophists. You know, theosophy should be tried sometime. And what Rūmī is doing is he's trying it. Really trying it. what was that remark about a misplaced diacritical mark? You know, that's not what's important. What's important is not the form of the words, but the inner meaning of the words. And that's what Sufism officially is all about, so to speak. One of the problems, I was going to say, modern psychology is more aware of this than it was in the 19th century, and HPV points this out, its inadequacy there. But one of the problems that we see from a psychological point of view is a person gets an insight, and it can be a really genuine insight. And then they cling to it. Carl Jung called this ego inflation. I get a real insight, and then what do? Say, I'm now the prophet of the truth, and you're supposed to believe me. That not only destroys the insight, but that's not what the insight was, right? I have an insight, and maybe a really powerful insight. The next question is, so now what's the next step? Because anything short of essence is relative. But that's kind of hard sometimes to remember. And the fact I have an insight does not mean it's going to mean anything to you if it's not in line with your own experience. So why am I trying to get you to believe my insight secondhand? Right. Courts are not supposed to accept secondhand testimony. So, sorry, Kurt, for going on so long.
No,
Oh, that was
sorry.
a great answer. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Elton, very, very much for the nourishing, and as somebody said in the comments, scintillating evening that you've given us. I feel like we've all been transported to Ithaca. Maybe we're all sitting around a fireplace or something and enjoying the just supreme delight of hearing you talk about Rūmī. So thank you very, very much. And I guess our time is up, and I can't thank you enough. So,
well, you're very welcome. And if anybody, I put in the chat right at the beginning, my email. If anybody wants the notes, which will contain those poems, send me an email and I'll be happy to send them to you.
and next week we have Monica will tell us about on Gandhi's birthday. She will celebrate Gandhi with us. And her title is Ahimsa Satyagraha, the remarkable life and influence of Mahatma Gandhi. So you're all very much welcome. Have a wonderful week. Thank you all very, very much.